So, welcome to the podcast, Julia. And what would be good is just from both our perspectives, just the audience know who they're talking to, just to give a couple of introductions. And then what we're looking at doing is kind of really deep diving in your journey and how you got to where you are today, the good, the bad, the ugly, and also just taking some direction from a content perspective, and then also just understanding the future that you would see in this particular space, which is fairly niche at the same time.
Thank you so much for having me, Anna. I'm really excited. It's the very first podcast that I'm recording here, and looking forward to our session today. Yeah, my name is Julia. I've been a compliance professional for roughly 15 years now. The first 10 years I spent in a large traditional bank in several different roles, and in the past 5 years I've been working in crypto compliance. Of course, there's a large focus on AML, but also with the MiCA regime coming into force by the beginning of 2025, there's an additional shift going towards MiCA.
No, we hear about MiCA a hell of a lot, and that's something which we'll be quite keen to get into, just for how you see that being implemented, the challenges, the benefits, and everything in between. But I suppose just to start us off, and this is something which I always find has a really interesting spin, because throughout people's career and throughout banking and crypto, you would have met a lot of people along that journey, a lot of different professionals in different areas, probably mentors externally, friends, family, and so forth. So what motivated you to pursue a career in that field? And quite often there are moments or people which inspire the journey and routes that you've decided to take. Was there anything that stands out that specifically springs to mind of a particular moment or a person which sort of inspired that journey for you?
It's a very good question, and it's a bit funny answer that I have to deliver here, because basically I was not motivated to go into compliance at all, because it was more of an accident. And I think looking back at my entire career, there's always this discussion around, do you have a career plan? Like getting out of university and then knowing, okay, I want to be a director with 35, I want to be a millionaire with 40 and a half or whatever. I never had that clear vision. The most clarity on vision was probably always on things that I did not want to do. And that was also how I ended up, how I came into compliance. Because when I did my my professional studies in banking, there were basically two routes you could go down. The one was on the advisory side, on customer relations, and the other one was more on the legal side. And since I had been working in the legal department of the bank before that, I tended to go down the legal route. And while I was finishing my bachelor's thesis on fraud prevention in the bank I used to work in back in the days. There was a role as a deputy MLRO open. So I applied for that role because I wanted to return from parental leave after 2 years. And that's how I got into compliance. So it was not a clear decision. It was more I don't want to do customer relations, but the legal aspect sounds interesting.
What was it that interested you to the legal side? Because legal has so many different facets, and people tend to choose that when in education. They kind of take a specialized topic on top of the bachelor's that they predominantly have. Was there one that kind of stood out to you, which is why you chose that particular route?
Yeah, what I really, as I said, I'm a banking professional from background. And what I really liked about the legal aspects was the clarity. Usually within legal, there's things that are allowed and that are not allowed, and you don't have too many gray zones. But the deeper I got into compliance, the more I realized, okay, life is basically just compiled out of gray zones.
I think that's a really key part, because I think people look at regulation and say, no, it's black and it's white. You know, you follow this or you don't follow this, and then it's fine. Whereas, and someone said this to me recently, it's all about interpretation. And everyone's going to interpret the laws, the regulations, the legislation in a multitude of manners. And that brings a lot of grey zones, because no two people are going to have the same thought process against how one is actually applied and how you actually use the other. So I think it's really interesting when you say you go down that route, because it's, you know, it's so kind of held up as to what they're actually able to do. But from a content perspective, kind of moving from legal more into the compliance space, there's always a fine line, I would say, between regulatory compliance and legal, and that usually gets a lot more blurrier when you go to product development or go to market for products itself. How do you see that line being defined between the both?
That's also a very good question. I think, like, to make it a bit more descriptive on the situation of legal and what's allowed and what's not allowed, I think we can all come to the final conclusion that if there's a stop sign at the road, you have to stop your car. The question
is... You can't go around that.
Exactly. And the question is, when do I start pushing my brake? Do I do it like in the last 10 meters before and then do a hard brake? Or do I slowly start taking back the gas a bit so that the car starts slowing down? And I think that draws the parallels towards the product management and the collaboration with the product team. Because, of course, you can integrate compliance at a very late point where compliance just raises its stop sign and says, no, we can't go any further. Yeah. Or you start integrating compliance at a very early stage, meaning from the compliance side, you show your openness to discussions, to being at least open to the new product proposal and what's up on the horizon, and then trying to sneak in the right questions at the right times.
Yeah, I think
to
that's
get the product people
as well. Yeah. I think it's also the lingo, isn't it? I mean, it would usually sit fairly separately, but compliance has had to get a lot more involved in the kind of more technical aspect of the beginning of the product development or the product creation phase. So they're involved in it throughout its product life cycle before the go-to-market, whereas I think if we would say a decade ago, that probably wasn't the case.
Exactly, yes.
And kind of looking at your career, you've done a lot within the leadership side, and there's a lot that comes into compliance leadership responsibilities. So for many years before officially getting the title of leadership, what did sort of stepping out of your comfort zone in order to move forwards, particularly going from a very well-established bank and a financial service organization into cryptocurrency, which is obviously a massive change, and people were very uncertain, particularly even 5 years ago, as to the setup and structure of a cryptocurrency organization. So leaving that role, what did it teach you about grit and career growth and kind of pushing yourself outside of that comfort zone?
Yeah, that's really a fantastic question, because it touches on the reality of so many professionals, especially women, the experience of leading without a title. So while I was in that bank, I was a deputy MLRO, I was a deputy compliance officer, and for years and years, I was the go-to person, the one suggesting strategy, the one managing crises. But I never, but that never really reflected within my title. And while it was a phenomenal training ground, it also taught me that my comfort had somehow become a cage. I managed in the background, but the ultimate decisions were then made by others. And stepping out of that role was one of the most defining moments in my career, because it basically taught me two very profound lessons. The first one is that grit is not just about endurance, it's also about courage. It's easy to think of grit as simply working harder and longer just to prove yourself, but true grit is having the courage to bet on yourself. It's looking at the situation where you're undervalued and saying, my contributions are worth much, much more than what's being seen here, and then really taking the terrifying leap. I mean, I worked at that bank for 23 years to find a place.
Change when you've been there for that long period of time. And I think as well, from what you've said, that there's a time in that at the very beginning where people coming to you for those types of questions and for those types of attributions, it's a huge learning curve, and it's a development, right? So you're getting to learn, adapt, your skill set's growing. But there's a
Exactly.
fine line between when that needs to stop and actually have some recognition of you've actually taken over that role rather than we're trying to help you mold to get there. And I think that's where people sort of misalign internally sometimes. Or, like you say, women don't necessarily put their foot forwards and make a stand, say, I've learned a lot, I've done a lot, I've earned that role. I've shown you I can do it. I'm doing it every single day now, but just out without the recognition of it. And then
E-
you obviously took your career into your own hands after having
Exactly.
realized that.
Exactly. It's because in the end, growth requires friction. You can't
Yeah.
grow in an environment that only asks you to maintain the status quo. And by leaving, I was really forced to articulate my value proposition from scratch, to interview for roles that stretched for my capabilities, and to build a new network. And that friction was definitely uncomfortable because it's where I discovered, but also it was where I discovered my true capacity. It taught me that career growth isn't a linear path handed to you. It's a structure you have to build for yourself, sometimes by deliberately leaving a comfortable foundation behind you.
Yeah. And I think that's the key word there is comfort. It's comfortable to you. And obviously, from what you had learned, obviously changing that over into the cryptocurrency field, which, doesn't have all the historical processes and procedures, has probably a little bit more different in terms of regulation with the maturity that they're up to against what you would have known. How did the skill set you developed complement the move over there? And where were the gaps of what you still needed to learn after having done it for such a long period of time, moving into such a new industry?
Well, I would say, and I just said that yesterday because I had organized an industry conference where compliance
Yeah.
professionals met, that I'm super thankful for the skill set that I developed during those 10 years in TradFi compliance, because the toolbox is the same in compliance, irrespective of if we're talking of TradFi or if we're talking of crypto. But the space where I really had to learn was on the underlying technology, because looking back at my perception of crypto when I joined the employer back in the days, it was mostly seen from the TradFi industry that crypto is only used for fraud, for illicit
Yeah.
purposes, money laundering, etc.
Hmm.
So I had brought a lot of intellectual curiosity, because yeah, because crypto was interesting, and I think I'm a naturally curious person. So initially, like many of my peers, as I said, the perception was shaped by the headlines: fraud, illicit finance, somehow the Wild West. But I started conversations with the tech guys from the firm, and I asked questions. Yeah, admittedly, sometimes they might have seemed dumb to the tech guys, but I tend to ask questions until I understand things. And then I had a profound realization that the underlying technology is about transparency and immutability. And those are concepts that a compliance professional basically dreams of, because what's written on the blockchain stays there and it doesn't move. So my curiosity actually completely dismantled my prejudice. And I saw that the challenge wasn't the industry was designed for fraud. And it was just so new and growing and so fast that the frameworks for trust and safety just hadn't been built back in the days. And that was my inspiration also. The move was a chance to go from being a guardian of an old system to being an architect of a new one. It allowed me to apply my first principles knowledge of risk management to a completely novel technology stack. And it also taught me that the greatest career opportunities often lie on the other side of the perceived notion. And the only way to get there is by asking why, and then being open to the answers given.
Yeah, and I think that is it. It's asking why. Why is this happening? And I always say it to people as well, when people understand the why of what you're doing, they come along for the journey and you gain buy-in, you gain their kind of commitment in order to making sure that's happened because they feel like they have a purpose. and what they're doing is purposeful, which is where the drive comes from. And I think where people with new industries, sometimes here and there, there's an ego involved with people who come from really big establishments who want to move over into crypto and think that they really know it all. You know, they've been doing it for sometimes 3-4 decades and moving over here, and, you know, they're getting questioned on why. Sometimes it's hard to change the mentality of you don't know this yet, and you need to speak to junior people, you need to speak to the tech guys, and you need to understand the why, so then you're able to do it properly. But also, as you quite rightly referenced, technology comes into a massive pact when you move over into this type of industry. So where you would have worked to build the policies and the frameworks and all of the regulatory guidelines previously and the legal documentation beforehand, there's probably a big enhancement used by technological factors as you move into crypto. What would you say was the biggest sort of challenge moving into a little bit more of a technical facilitation?
I think we can straightly come back to the why.
Yes.
Yeah. As funny as that may sound, because the why is actually really has been one of the greatest challenges. Because when talking to the product people, talking to the tech people, they are like, with tech, we can build everything. We can code, we can do. And then I come along with, oh, but we have to do KYC on our customers. We have to identify them. And then they're like, why? Why should we? Because the DApp, the wallet, works without identification. And then I say, yes, because we're a regulated institution, and also we have a reputation to lose. So by identifying our customers, we fulfill the regulatory requirements. We can help to prevent illicit transactions within the ecosystem, etc. And the answering this why questions really helps. Also, not just for myself, but also when talking to other departments within the firm.
No, I completely understand that, and it's as you quite rightly referenced, the why always comes back to what you're actually looking to do with it. When we last spoke, and we've spoken a couple of times beforehand, hiring women and mentorship of women is something which resonates with you quite highly, and it's something which you really look for, and it's important to you as well. And I suppose you are a mother, like you referenced at the very beginning, when you came back from maternity and you was looking at different roles, and now you're a senior leader. How have you balanced personal challenges with building a career in compliance? And also, as a secondary question on that, why is it important to you to mentor and hire women?
Okay, first of all, I think the word balance is a bit of a myth.
Yes.
It suggests that there's a perfect equilibrium, which is impossible. I tend to prefer the term integration. My life as a mother and my life as a leader, they're not two separate things. No. I try to balance. They are two integrated parts of who I am, and which makes the other one stronger. So they're really complementary to one another. And being a single mother, I think, has always been my secret weapon, because it just taught me ruthless prioritization, unparalleled efficiency, and also empathy under pressure. When you have a hard stop every day to pick up your child, you learn to get an 8-hour day done in 6 hours. And when you've navigated a toddler's or a teenager's tantrum, a complex negotiation with a regulator feels surprisingly manageable. And you also lead
That's so
to learn.
Funny.
Yes, but it is. Usually the regulators, they don't go down the personal path, while your kids really know where your personal weak points are, and they will put their finger in. Exactly. Yeah, and also you learn to lead with compassion, because you understand that the unseen challenges of your team members that they might be facing, and there's always a story behind what's seen on the cover.
No, absolutely. And I think that's a really good point to say as well, because I feel like, and probably I am detriment to it as well, you see them both separately. That's the personal side and that's the work side. And that's where I think we all say, how do we balance both? was I think it's really important what you just said is it's not balancing, it's an integration of two compartments of who you are as an individual, and both of them matter together. So it's not balancing, it's just how you integrate and make them both work at the same time. And I think that's a really key thing to kind of emphasize here, because I'm guilty, and I'm sure a lot of other people are, of trying to balance them both, and sometimes one goes like this and one goes like that, and it's like a weighted scale. And I think if we learn to integrate it a little bit more, to make them, to realize both of them are what makes us us, then I think the importance and prioritization, as you mentioned, will probably become a lot more seamless.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's also why mentoring and hiring women is really an important factor for me. It's not just about giving back as a leader. It's also a strategic business imperative, because diverse teams which absolutely must include women at every level, they make better decisions. They see risks others miss and find opportunities that others may overlook. And additionally, from experience, it's usually mothers that want to jump into a certain role. They will show the grit and determination necessary to fulfill it, because a job often gives the opportunity to be seen as a person and acknowledged in your day-to-day achievements, while motherhood itself sometimes does not deliver that experience of satisfaction. And I also mentor because I want the person I needed when I myself was a younger person, someone who could say, your family life doesn't make you less committed, it makes you a more capable leader. I would also like to point out that hiring women is an immense, often untapped reservoir of talent also that is out there. And building the next generation of female leaders isn't just the right thing to do. It's how we build more resilient and successful companies going forward.
And what would be the type of women in terms of their life structure at the moment that you would provide mentorship to? Are they women in the industry, or are they in different industries? Are they in education? Kind of what's the flavor?
I don't have a preferred type of women.
No, but just from what the people you're mentoring at the moment, historically, have they come from kind of in industry where they are sort of compliance friends, or are they in education and, you know, they're just trying to figure the way of where they're looking at taking it, or are they kind of mothers looking to get back into the industry predominantly? What's the sort of mentorship line that you've taken?
Actually, also here, no clear answer. It's I had a meeting with a university from Frankfurt a few weeks ago, and there were really young professionals and had very good conversations with them, but that was not a long-term mentorship there. While looking at the longer-term mentorships, it was sometimes women which were already in the industry, but like in other departments, or who had other functions, but also sometimes mothers that returned back from their parental leave and tried to find a ground within the company. So that really shifts depending on the situation I am in at the point of time.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. I think it just comes into, because like you quite rightly say, sometimes you go just for talks at universities. And although it's one talk rather than a continuation of mentorship, it changes people's thought processes. And in that singular session, it can be seen as mentorship because they're getting exposure to what is capable in the industry. And, you know, like you referenced, you were inspired to go from traditional banking into the world of crypto from a conversation with someone. So by having those conversations with people like that, you could inspire them to go into traditional banking or into crypto or into legal or into compliance. And I think that adds a lot for people to be able to take away. And, you know, for a perception of our industry seen as, you know, only for fraud, I think it adds a lot where you have someone of your tenure in such structured organizations move into that facet to show, you know, it's a reputable organization. And I think as cryptocurrency companies have institutionalized where they can sort of hold custodian money itself, it's becoming a lot more governed, and that has an impact on how they're actually seen from within the financial service organization.
Exactly. Definitely. I can 100% underscore that. Yes.
And I suppose as well, just kind of looking at Bullish, you're building an institutional grade MiCA, an AML framework, and we've touched across that, across how that impacts different regions and how it can grow the business and scaling compliance. And I suppose looking at it from that sort of content perspective and regional exposure, what would you say the biggest challenges in scaling compliance in such a fast evolving and still uncertain industry in certain aspects? How would that all tie in together? Both challenges and I suppose the successes of it.
Okay, yeah. Well, building a compliance framework in crypto is kind of like assembling an airplane, which is already in flight during a hurricane.
Yeah,
So
okay, just to add that one on.
yeah, yes, yeah. And the challenges, they're not only immense, but they're also incredibly exciting because we're all in an environment that is learning. The compliance professionals are learning, the crypto firms are learning, the auditors are learning, but also the supervisory authorities are learning themselves.
Yeah.
And I would here like to highlight three main ones. The first one is it's a bit of building on shifting sands because we're building for regulations like MiCAR that are brand new, while anticipating rules that haven't even been written yet. And you can't just create a static checklist that you can work on in the following years. You have to build a dynamical, principle-based framework that's flexible enough to adapt to the new regulatory guidance, some level 2, level 3, ESMA questions and answers, whatever, but also able to adapt to new products, new technologies, and that often with very little lead time.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is the pace of innovation versus the pace of regulation, because in this industry, a new complex financial product can be developed and launched in a matter of months, while traditional rulemaking takes years. And as a compliance leader, you can't be the department of no. Your challenge is to embed the compliance into the product development lifecycle from day one, enabling innovation while managing the risks in real time. And that really requires a level of collaboration with product and engineering teams that is far, far deeper than in traditional finance. And the last point is the talent and tooling gap. Because the pool of people who really deeply understand both the nuances of the financial regulations and the complexities of the blockchain technology is incredibly small. Finding and training the right talent is a constant challenge. And furthermore, traditional AML monitoring tools aren't built for on-chain analytics. We often have to build our own solution or work with very highly specialized vendors to get the transaction monitoring and risk scoring capabilities that we need.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned there as well just the pace of innovation and change against the pace of regulations. That's still a big bridge in order to kind of piece together. How do you manage working with and moving with the pace of change against regulatory developments? Because obviously there's a clear gap in terms of the pace of both of them.
I think a lot of it comes down to a sensible risk management framework, because with most products, you can build some kind of a bridge towards an existing product, towards an existing regulation that you can use or at least leverage those points that will be necessary for the risk management of the firm. Mm-hmm. And that's how I usually tackle that.
And do you have much imposed from the actual regulator? Do you have to take them along sort of with you for that? Because I know you mentioned around, building the appetite and the framework and the advancement of it, but you guys move so much faster than the regulator itself. How do you kind of keep them along on the journey, having an understanding of what the impact is?
It's through constant conversations. It's like you need to have good relationships within your firm,
Yes.
but you also need to have a good relationship with your regulator, your direct supervisors. So regularly meeting with them, showing what's planned, showing the parallels, the risk mitigation measures that will be implemented and planned. I think that is really key. And then what also always helps is using a known terminology, because all
Yeah.
regulators, they have their own terminology. And if you use those terminologies, it helps to build the bridges and in the end to really get to a common understanding so that everybody is like, oh, okay, it's not as complicated as it seemed at the first moment. And yes, we can go proceed with the process or the product.
Of course. And do you find now the regulator itself is a lot more open to being educated by the industry, whereas I think if historically they very were stuck in the mold and it wasn't really open to change, and they've kind of had their hand forced due to the amount of innovation and progression within that space, where they kind of need to look to you for support as to what this means and how it goes. Have you found them a lot more open to that journey, or are you still finding it some hesitance behind it?
Well, speaking for BaFin, the German regulator, I have conceived them as superly open over the last 5 years since I've been in crypto. It's always been a collaboration. Of course, sometimes there is a bit of tension, but there has always been a positive course forward. So I never had
Like you
the
say,
feeling.
healthy tension.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, but I never had the feeling that there were any resentments saying, oh, crypto, no, we don't really. Yeah. So that was really always open discussions.
Good. And I suppose kind of looking at it from other professionals looking to make a move, and you mentioned beforehand, sometimes it can be hard to hire the professionals you need in that technological space. What advice would you give to professionals considering a move into cryptocurrency?
I would also like to propose a threefold advice. The first one is get curious. The second one, get humble and ready to learn. And the third one is to get networked to leverage your core skills. And I'm happy to put a bit more color behind that. The first one on the curious side, just don't read only the headlines. You really have to go deeper. You have to open yourself a wallet, use a decentralized app, maybe even read a Bitcoin or Ethereum white paper. You never have to become a coder. I'm also farly abandoning of
I was going to
becoming a
say, have
coder.
you had to move into that space
No.
or not?
Yeah, there's a few fields where I say to my colleagues, you're the coding expert, I'm the compliance expert, and you do you, I do me.
Yeah.
But in the end, you do have to understand the fundamental principles of the technology to really be effective, and your credibility as a professional will depend on that. The second one is to really get humble and get ready to learn, because your decade of experience or your years of experience in traditional finance is invaluable, but you must accept that you're a student again. The technology, the culture, the vocabulary, they're all new. And if you come with a mindset of, I'm here to apply my expertise to a new paradigm and not, I'm here to tell you how it's done in the real world, the industry really respects those builders and learners. And comparing the banking, traditional finance industry and the crypto industry, I enjoy working in the crypto industry so much more because the personal relationships and the people working there, they're just so much more open to even dumb questions being asked. So that's really a great thing. But you have to come with the right mindset. And then the third factor, just to leverage your core skills and not to abandon them. The industry desperately needs skills of seasoned professionals in risk management, in legal, in finance modeling, and in compliance frameworks. So the core principles, they're the same. A risk is a risk, whether it's on a blockchain or it's on a bank's ledger, and your job is to be the bridge to translate the timeless principles of risk management into this new technological landscape.
Mhm.
And it's a challenging transition sometimes, but those who are actually intellectually curious and adaptable, there's no more exciting field to be in for working right now.
I think that gives a really good overview. And one that would be interesting is from a culture perspective. I think how big was the change for you from traditional finance to crypto? What was the sort of biggest changes you touched on a couple of them there, but what was the biggest mindset shift?
I think that especially the hierarchy thinking in traditional finance is very, very strong. So if you're just a normal specialist for something, you have to ask your manager for permission to ask another manager a question, for example.
Yeah.
While in finance, while here in crypto, you just have Slack. You open your Slack messaging tool, you send the person a question, you get an answer and ready. And if you want to go a bit deeper, you just schedule a meeting. And the hierarchy thinking is much less developed, which is a super positive thing.
No, I really like that. And I think it's also just that sort of mindset shift of just the accessibility of everyone in the organization and how open they are to new ideas. And it's kind of approaching with a flat hierarchical structure rather than kind of set direct lines of communication up the chain. And I suppose as well, just to kind of sort of round us off, and it's one that I really always enjoy asking, is you are where you are today, but you also started where you started. And if you now could say something to your younger self, which would be impactful for where you are now, and also sort of frame it in the way for advice for the next generation, you could say, of giving it to younger women or anyone really looking or considering careers in high intense industries or within the compliance space, what would be the advice that you would give to yourself, as well as kind of all the younger people at the moment looking at taking that next step or trying to plan that move?
Okay, so the first advice that I would give is to always think independently. Um, don't take for granted what some third person thinks. Use it as an impulse, use it as a starting point in thinking, but then really continue thinking by yourself. Try to understand everything by yourself. And then deriving from that, you can find your voice and try to use it early because those high intensity environments, they can sometimes be intimidating. And it's really easy to stay quiet in a meeting, in a conversation, thinking you need more experience before you speak, but
Yeah.
don't do that. Your perspective is unique and it's valuable. And it's precisely because often it's different. It's because what you came up and what you really thought through. So prepare your subject and then speak with convictions. Don't wait for a permission to take a seat at the table. Really build your opinion and then, but also be open to someone having a better opinion or having better arguments and proving you might be wrong. And then really accepting that, but accepting it with gratitude because you just received a chance to learn something. And then finally, and most importantly, I think it's important to define success in your own terms. These industries, they will try to define it for you. It's the title, it's the bonus, it's the corner of the office. And that is kind of like a recipe for burnout. True sustainable success includes your well-being, your growth, and your impact. So you have to try to learn to set boundaries and understand it's a marathon. It's never a sprint. If you start in your career, you have a couple of decades before you. So you can be fiercely ambitious within your career, but you have to be even fiercer in protecting your own health and happiness. And your best work will come from a place of strength and not of exhaustion.
I really like that. I really like the fact of determining your own success, but I also really like the one of sharing all of your opinions and taking it on board if someone has a better one than you and being able to use it and put your ego aside and realize you've just learned something. You're able to kind of share the room and share all of your experiences to get to the same end goal. And I think that's the journey of having everybody take the journey together and everyone on board for the same direction that they're looking to take. So, look, I think it's all been very insightful. I think it's really interesting from where you started your career to where you are. And the technological build out and the adaptation to regulations, to cultures, to different industries. I think it's really inspiring, and I think people will be able to take a lot from this story, and from a content perspective, how it's changed across the years and how Mika is now becoming such a big part of the industry. It's core factors for being able to learn and develop, and people of your seniority still saying we still need to learn, we still need to develop, we still need to take other people's ideas. Although you're seen as the solution provider, sometimes your team may come along with a better idea, and it's having the adaptability and willingness to use that. And I think that's extremely, extremely interesting. So I want to say thank you so much for joining the podcast. It's been absolutely incredible having you as a guest, and it's been, from my side, very insightful, let alone to everyone else who'll get to watch this at a later date as well. So no, as I say, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Anna. I love this conversation as well.